Hey guys, welcome. um, Somewhat quickly, though I'm not quite sure how quick this will go, just one business matter to let you guys know about. So if you were here at our Sunday gathering, you heard Josh kind of unpack how we're going to be reducing the number of services, Sunday services here at Door of Hope. Which is kind of counterintuitive because we've never had more people coming to our Sunday gatherings. But there's a logic behind it. And it's actually that decision was a part of a number of larger conversations that we're having. And, essentially, this is also just speaking very personally, too. There's quite a number of us on the staff team that are just completely burnt out, like you couldn't even imagine. We're just exhausted, and I'm high on that list. And so we've been just having conversations about like, man, what are we doing? And do we need to enter into a season of less is more? And so one of the things we're doing was, the Sunday gathering, reducing those. But we had a long, hard conversation about Year of Torah on Wednesday mornings. And even though I've been saying for a year that I want to keep on going because there's a huge part of me that really does, I think it is best, at least for a season, that when we hit the end of Deuteronomy, we need to take a break for a while. And if we don't, my wife will kill me. So, that's just kind of, but yeah, so there you go. There's, I actually, Year of Torah, for me, this is a total joy, and I've loved the community that has kind of come into life. Good morning, you guys. Come into life around it. But at the same time, it takes a chunk of my Tuesdays thinking about this morning, and then on Wednesdays, I am fried by like 1 or 2 p.m. And there's just a whole bunch of stuff that I need to be working on for the elder team and other stuff around Door of Hope through the fall, and I need more hours in the day. So there you go. We're going to let Year of Torah come to a close at the end of Deuteronomy. Now, we love morning stuff around Door of Hope, so probably turn of the year we'll have hatch some new plan to get us all up 5 in the morning to do something, to pray for 90 days and do push-ups or something like that. So anyway, you've come to expect that around here. But at least for the rest of the fall, yours truly and a number of others of us need to shave some things off of our responsibilities. So anyway, there you go. Cheers. You're probably disappointed like I am, but you're also like, okay, I get it, and it's all right. But I'm sad because it's been such a joy to me. So there you go. I'm happy to talk about any of that afterwards. Okay, you guys ready? We're going to cross a major fault line today from Deuteronomy 26 to 27, so let's not dilly-dally. Let's go for it. Deuteronomy 26. This is the last chapter of laws, you guys. I'm sorry. When you have entered the land Yahweh your God is giving you. Oh, by the way, mental count. This is the last chapter of the laws. So remember the whole big picture, all the way back to here. You have ancient Israel. They're sitting on the borders, about to cross the Jordan River. Moses gave a whole bunch of sermons. Here's why Yahweh is awesome. So here are the terms of the covenant relationship, and then he's going to do another locker room speech here. And so this is the last set of laws, and you know how they've kind of had that grab bag, random kind of feel through this section. So just think to yourself, why conclude with these laws that we're going to be reading in 26 right here? Okay. And in this particular law, count the number of times that the word give occurs. You guys with me? We're going to read a paragraph. Count the number of times that the word give occurs. When you have entered the land Yahweh your God is giving you as an inheritance, and have taken possession of it and settled in it, Take some of the first fruits of all that you produce from the soil of the land that Yahweh your God is giving you, and put them in a basket. And then go to the place Yahweh your God will choose as a dwelling for his name. And say to the priest who is in office at that time, I declare today to Yahweh your God that I have come to the land Yahweh swore to our forefathers to give us. And the priest shall take the basket from your hands and set it down in front of the altar of Yahweh your God from your hands. From the altar of your God. Then you shall declare before Yahweh your God. Okay, so let's pause real quick here. This is a great scene. So remember, all of these laws are forward pointing. They're for ancient Israel, and the whole thing is pointing forward to when Israel exists here in the land. And so we're setting up a whole series of laws about going to the temple and presenting an offering. For these people, none of this exists yet. This is all theory right now, or it's setting out an ideal. And so you have this law about offering the first fruits. Now, generally, on an agricultural calendar, these are all going to be small farming communities. When are you getting your first fruits? What times of year are you getting your first fruits? Kind of comes to different crops give different first fruits. So maybe like spring, early summer for different kinds of fruit, and then you have typically like late summer or early fall for your cereal grains, barley and wheat and stuff like that. And so a couple times a year, you're going to come and you get a whole bunch of, apples or grapes or wheat or something, and you go take it to the temple and you set it in front of the priest. And then you say, well, here's what you say, verse 5. You shall declare before Yahweh your God, my father was a wandering Aramean. Now that almost just sounds like if you took that out of context, your father was a wandering Aramean. It's like something little kids would yell at each other, on the playground or something like that, So your dad's a wandering Aramean. So that's not a diss. It's not slander or anything like that. So who's talking here? Any Joe, Moshe, or Esther Israelite? So when we say my father was a wandering Aramean, who are we talking about? So when we say my father, we're talking about the patriarchs, aren't we? So Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, kind of the patriarchs of Israel. Which of them wandered around in the land of Aram, or the land of the Arameans, for a really long time? And that's Jacob. So you remember that whole thing about how he stole from his brother twice. His name is Deceiver, after all, Jacob. Any Jacobs in the room, I'm sorry. Your name means deceiver. And then his brother Esau got really mad that he stole from him, and he said he wanted to kill him. And so where does Jacob go? Poof, he books it for Aram and meets his uncle Laban, and then there's that whole story that we explored a year and a half ago, something like that. So my father was a wandering Aramean. The whole point was he represented a family that didn't have any land, that wasn't rooted anywhere. And the story actually for this family got worse because he went down into Egypt, remember the whole debacle with Joseph and his brothers, with a few people, and he lived there, and he became a great nation, powerful and numerous. But then the Egyptians mistreated us. They made us suffer, putting us to hard labor. And so we cried out to Yahweh, the God of our fathers. And Yahweh heard our voice, and he saw our misery and our toil and our oppression. And so Yahweh brought us up out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, with great terror, with miraculous signs and wonders. He brought us to this place, and he gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey, which, remember, what does that mean? If it's flowing with milk and honey, what's it full of? Full of goats and bees. Goats and bees, right? The rocks don't pour out honey, right? Although, I remember when I first was reading the Bible, that was the image in my head, of like the rocks spout honey. That's so weird. How does the land flow with honey? Because there's lots of bees, goats and bees. Now, I bring the first fruits of the soil to you, Yahweh. And now I bring the first fruits of the soil that you, O Yahweh, have given me. Place the basket before Yahweh your God. Bow down before him. You and the Levites, the immigrants among you shall rejoice in all the good things Yahweh your God has given you and your household. Now, just pause. How many times did the word give occur? Were you counting? Got 5? Only 5? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've got 6. Now, all forms of the word give, gave, given. That's you're counting all those? Verse 5, giving, participles count. Verse 7, verse 2. So 5 or 6. So what's the setting here of this law? Again, remember, one of the last laws in the whole block of laws. And we're talking about you're going to go to this land, and how did Israel receive this land? 6 or 5 times over. How did Israel receive this land? It was given. So here we go. Hebrew at 6:30 in the morning or whatever. Hebrew for give, it's the word natan. Now, this is interesting, too. The Hebrew word for gift is the word matan, and it's a related root word, matan. It's a very common name, actually, in modern Hebrew as well. I knew a matan when I was in grad school. Anyway, so the whole point is that this word give is connected to the root word gift in Hebrew. And so the whole idea is that Israel exists purely as an act of Yahweh's grace, and everything they have as a gift. The land that they're living on is gift. So you take the fruit of the land, first fruits, you take it to the temple, and then you tell the story. You're supposed to do this multiple times a year. You go to the temple, and then you tell the story of the great family that you're a part of. And what is their story? They're telling their salvation story, aren't they? So they tell, like, Jacob didn't have a lot going for him. He was your dad's a wandering Aramean. And then they were in Egypt, and that definitely didn't go well, and so on. And so it all happens with verse 8. He brought justice on Egypt. Verse 9, he brought us to this place, and he gifted us with this land that's just exploding with potential. So look at verse 10. We've come across this theme in Deuteronomy before. It says, now I bring the first fruits of the soil that you, Yahweh, have given me. Now just stop and think about that. So I'm giving back, a little bit, the first fruits. The whole field is there waiting to be harvested. Here's the first fruits. I bring you the first fruits that you have given me. Now, so who has been out there working day and night, laboring hard to water and cultivate those fields? Who's been doing that? So this guy and his family that have been speaking. But yet, what does he say about the fruit of what came out of that field? How does he view it? He views it as a gift. Do you see the logic there? So we've come across this before in the book of Deuteronomy. We're installing these practices into the life of God's people that you force yourself to remember that all of this activity and energy that you're putting out, all is just assuming and built upon this gift of your existence, and in this case, their gift, the gift of the land that's God's grace to them. So this, we're already kind of getting into the covenant sermon territory, because we had multiple messages about that idea of living as if all that you have is gift and grace and so on. So, okay, so there's that law. You tell the story. Verse 12 begins a new law connected to this one. So when you've finished setting aside a tenth of all your produce in the 3rd year, the year of the tithe, you shall give it to the Levite, to the immigrant, to the fatherless, and the widow, so that they can eat in your towns and be satisfied. Now, this is reaching back. We're right here. We're actually reaching back to something that we hit in chapter 14. Do you remember the week? In 14 was the summary of all the tithing or the tenth that the Israelites were to give. Do you remember that? This was like 2 months ago. That was the year I deconstructed the whole 10% thing. Because the word tithe does mean 10%. It just means 10 in Hebrew. Esher. It just means 1/10. But there were actually 3 different kinds of tithes that an Israelite family would give. One was to the temple, another was to the Levites, and then another was something they saved up every 3rd year, and they gave to the local food bank. Do you remember that from chapter 14? Maybe if you were here. So every 3 years, you're saving up a tenth of what you make over the course of every 3 years, and then every Israelite family gives that to a local distribution center in their town or in their village or whatever. And it's for, who does it say that it's for? It says it's for all of the most vulnerable in a small farming community, the Levites, the immigrants, the fatherless, and the widow, so that they may eat and be satisfied. Okay. Why are we bringing up that law? Let's keep reading. Verse 13, then say to Yahweh your God, I have removed from my house the sacred portion, and I have given it to the Levite, the immigrant, the fatherless, and the widow, according to all that you've commanded. I haven't turned aside from your commands, nor have I forgotten any of them. Now, so just stop right there. So we're being reminded of this law about setting aside this tenth over the course of every 3 years. It's for the most vulnerable. And then this verse, here's what we're saying when we go present it. What is it called in verse 13, that portion that you've set aside? What's it called? Verse 13? So NIV has sacred portion. Any other translations of that in verse 13? The holy tithe. There you go. The hallowed things. Mm-hmm. Any others? Consecrated portion. There you go. So how many ways can you say holy things? Apparently 4 different ways, right? In English. So in other words, this is either non-perishable food items, or you've converted that into like some sort of cash value, and you set it aside, and it's sacred. It's consecrated. You can't touch it because it doesn't belong to you. And you're like, what do you mean? It's from my field. Yes, but it doesn't belong to you because who gave you that field in the first place? And we're all the way back here again to the gift and the grace. So it's called a sacred portion. And he goes on to say, verse 14, this Israelite says, I haven't eaten of any of the sacred portion while I was in mourning. So if you had someone in your family die, you would take 7 or 14 days. You would wear certain kinds of clothing. You wouldn't work. So for 1-2 weeks, you're obligated to mourn the death of a relative. You're not producing any income in those 2 weeks. It'd be really tempting to dip into the sacred portion, right? That's in the cabinet or whatever. But no, I didn't do that. I haven't removed any of it when I was unclean or ritually impure. I haven't offered it to any of the dead. I have obeyed Yahweh my God. I've done everything you commanded me. So look down from heaven, from your holy dwelling place, and bless your people, Israel, and the land you've given us that you promised on oath to our forefathers, a land flowing with milk and honey. And there you go. That's the last law. Those 2 laws right there. And then there's a little summary paragraph, and there you go. The final laws. We just did them, you guys. Holy cow. We should have a party. Actually, no. We should have a party on the last day of year of the Torah. When we hit Deuteronomy 34, we should get Portland's best donuts. But we're going to have a debate about what the best donuts are, because they're obviously Blue Star donuts, in my humble opinion. Any other votes for the best donut in Portland? Blue Star. Any other Blue Star votes? Oh, quite a few. Okay, what else? Who can battle? Pips? Pips are really good. And we can get them at a discount because there's a lot of people at Pips who come to Door of Hope. Well, okay, anyway, we'll figure that out. So here are the last two laws. 1, 2. First fruits, make sure you offer them, bring them there, and then the tithe of all your, and look at verse 12. What is this tenth or what is this tithe? What does it consist of? What a tenth of all of your what? Produce. So notice both of the last 2 laws are about the produce of the land. Both of these laws assume the land is going to be fruitful and so on. And first of all, you take the first fruits and you give it back to Yahweh in this offering, because you remember that the only reason you're on this land is the gift of God's grace. But then you also remind yourself that the land doesn't belong to you by giving it away, that saving up this tenth and giving it to the most vulnerable, to the fatherless, the widow, the immigrant, and so on. And then it ends with this prayer, right, of verse 15, saying, look, I did it. I gave you this offering. I gave to the poor. Look down from heaven and bless your people and bless this land that you've given us. So this is really, oh, look, you guys will think this is funny. Here we go. I actually made a special drawing this morning, and did I need to? Nope, because here's the other one right here. There it is. It was just right there, and I didn't even know it. But I like this one better because I added some special stuff to it. Okay. So here, I don't know where to draw this. Maybe I'll just put it down here for the moment. So you have, remember, this is the whole nature of the covenant. You have, if Israel obeys the laws of the covenant, they honor Yahweh, they give their allegiance to Him, then that's going to bring blessing and abundance to their land. And if there's blessing and abundance, who is for sure going to be taken care of in these Israelite farming communities? Because if you're blessed, you're going to both give that tenth to Yahweh as an offering, but who's going to be well taken care of in those communities? So the most vulnerable, right? The widow, the orphan, the Levite, and the immigrants. And so then you have this whole issue of the poor. What word should we use here? Provision. We'll just call this provision. Provision for the poor. And then if they're doing that, then that represents obedience to the Torah, which is going to bring about more abundance and blessing to the land and so on. It's sort of like this cycle. The more Israel obeys, the more the poor are provided for, because Yahweh honors their obedience with blessing the land and so on. It's this cycle. Now, of course, if Israel turns away from Yahweh and gives their allegiance to other gods, that both dishonors Yahweh, yes, but who also suffers? Who gets crushed in the midst of all of that? It's this ecosystem of obedience and material blessing, and part of that obedience is actually providing for the poor. And these are the last 2 laws that the laws in Deuteronomy end with. So Christopher Wright, who I've been quoting from occasionally, he just has a great way of of summarizing this. Okay, so he says, thus, in these two laws here, giving to the poor is not only a sacred duty to God, but here it is also the defining point for any claim to have kept the law. The law is only kept when the Israelites care for their poor. And you can see this here in verses 13 and 15. He says, listen, I've given the tenth and so on. At the end of verse 14, I have obeyed Yahweh my God and done everything you commanded me. So he goes on, he says, it's only when Israel responds to the needy by enabling everyone in the community to eat and be satisfied can they say out loud, I have done everything you have commanded me. This shows once again the essential thrust of Old Testament ethics. You know, Old Testament, the fire-belching God who roasts people alive and is a meanie, right? So if that whole deal of the vengeful Old Testament God's really undermined by the book of Deuteronomy. Because here we're seeing, as he goes on, it says, love for neighbor is the practical proof of any claimed love for God. It also shows how enacted love for the poor and the needy is the practical proof of genuine God-honoring love for the neighbor. So the Torah here agrees with the way the later prophets will pinpoint and prioritize care for the poor as definitive of Israel's response to God as a whole. The prophets argue passionately that the neglect of the most vulnerable in society invalidates all of Israel's claims to their enthusiastic religious observance. Sacred rituals are no atonement for social wrongs. That will keep you awake at night or bother you for the rest of the day because it's so early. But these are the last two laws that the whole body of laws ends with. And it's about worship and obedience. And when Israel does that, this very practical issue of social justice and care for the vulnerable is taken care of. It's not like something you tack on. It's like inherent to the whole deal. Isn't that powerful? Verse 16. Yahweh your God commands you this day to follow these decrees and laws, to carefully observe them with all your heart, with all your soul. You have declared this day that Yahweh is your God, that you will walk in his ways, that you will keep his decrees and commands and laws, that you will obey him. And Yahweh has declared this day that you are his people, his treasured possession, just as he promised. And so there's Yahweh's. He brought you out of Egypt, made you his unique people, and that you are to keep all his commands. He has declared that he will, this is the NIV, set you in praise, fame, and honor high above all the nations he's made, and that you will be a people holy to Yahweh your God, just as he promised. Now, did anyone have kind of different wording for verse 19 as I read it out loud? You're kind of used to it maybe because we have a host of different translations in the room. So this is the New International Version. He's declared that he'll set you in praise, fame, honor, high above all of the nations. Let's read New American Standard. I think will give us. Yes, yeah. So New American Standard renders the Hebrew a little more literally. He will set you high above all nations that he's made, for praise, fame, and honor, and that you shall be a consecrated people to Yahweh your God. Now there's a difference of interpretation here that's reflected in our translations. Look at verses 18 and 19. Here's the statement. Yahweh's made you a treasured possession, his people. If you obey, he's going to set you high above the nations that he's made. And here's the result. fame, praise, and honor. Now, you might just assume, whose praise, fame, and honor? NIV really hasn't given you any choice. Whose praise, fame, and honor is the focus here in how the New International Version translates it? So it's the Israelites, right? He will set you in praise, fame, and honor. Now that's a legitimate translation, but at least the way the Hebrew sentence is set up, there is another option for who is the object of fame, praise, and honor. It could be that he's done it for Israel, or it could be that it's whose praise, fame, and honor? Yahweh's. So why has Yahweh taken this people group, redeemed them from Egypt, given them this land, given them a very unique set of terms to live by? Why? And set them above the nations, so to speak. We'll talk about that. For what purpose? For praise, for fame, and for honor. It's strangely ambiguous. Well, whose praise, fame, and honor? Does this mean God is perpetually pro-Israel? That's what some people think it means. If you read the books of Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, you'll see that Yahweh is not always pro-Israel. In fact, he's willing to let Israel get the same treatment as the Canaanites got for disobedience and getting exiled from the land. And so I personally think that we're talking about Israel exists to bring Yahweh praise, fame, and honor. So I think the New American Standard is a little more helpful for us. Now, why is this important? So this is the last paragraph. These are the last sentence of the laws in Deuteronomy. And so we're giving once more, this is a rationale for why these laws exist here. And we're actually, Yahweh has taken you out to become a treasured possession. Does that ring any bells at all? One of the key passages in the whole storyline of the Old Testament. This is all the way back at Exodus 19. This is one of those messy chalkboard drawing days. Exodus 19. This is Israel's been redeemed from Egypt and slavery. They're brought to the foot of Mount Sinai. This is before they get any laws whatsoever. And this is Yahweh's whole rationale. He says, you guys saw what I did to the Egyptians. I bore you on eagle's wings to myself, brought you to myself. Now then, if you will obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you will be my own possession. There's that key word, treasured possession among all the peoples. For all the earth is mine. So Yahweh's taken this people group from among all the nations. He's brought them to himself. For what purpose? What's the purpose? Why is Israel called to obey these laws and so on? And here we go, this is the logic of the whole thing. A kingdom of priests and a holy nation. If you've come regularly to Year of Torah, we've talked about this concept how many times? Holy cow, like 24 times. So Israel exists not for itself, but it's a nation that will be shaped according to Yahweh's generosity and justice so that they become a reflection of Yahweh out to the nations. That's what priests do. They mediate between God and the people. And so Israel is called to obedience so that they become this nation that's at least becoming more the kinds of humans that Yahweh made us all to be, but that we all fail to be. And so that's the purpose. It's not that Yahweh likes Israel more than anybody else. It's because Yahweh loves the whole world that he's doing what he's doing with Israel. But it all hinges on their obedience, and that's the key here in Deuteronomy 26. And how's that going to go? Deuteronomy 27. Okay, Deuteronomy 27 begins the last section of the covenant sermons, and this is so interesting. 27. Moses and the elders of Israel, They commanded the people. This is the first time we've had story. This is the first narrative in the book we've had since she's all the way like back here at chapter 3 months ago. Keep all the commands I give you today. When you've crossed the Jordan into the land Yahweh your God is giving you, set up huge stones and coat them with plaster. So you have these huge rocks, and then you paint them with plaster. Write on them all the words of this law, or this Torah, when you have crossed over to enter the land Yahweh your God is giving you, a land full of goats and bees, just as Yahweh your God promised you. Now when you've crossed the Jordan and you set up these stones, you are to set up these stones on Mount Ebal, just as I have commanded you today, coat them with plaster, and build there an altar to Yahweh your God, an altar of stones. So you get the stones, you paint them with plaster so that it's a nice white surface, and you write out the whole Torah on these huge rocks. And then you take them to the top of this hill, and then you build an altar. I don't know why that's funny to me, but it's a lot of words to write on. These are huge. Clearly, these are really big rocks. I guess you put them on a wagon or something like that. We're in verse 5. Don't use any iron tools. Don't carve the rocks or anything. Use field stones, whatever. Build the altar of Yahweh your God with field stones. Offer burnt offerings on it. Sacrifice fellowship offerings, eating them, rejoicing in the presence of Yahweh your God. And you shall write very clearly all the words of this Torah on these stones that you have set up. Holy cow. What a job. What a job. Now, just so you know, because I like to show you this kind of stuff, well, two things. One, have you guys ever heard of the Mesha stone? The Mesha stone? Oh, this was one of the most exciting archaeological finds of the late 1800s, when the British really began doing archaeological discovery in Israel, Palestine. So it's a large basalt obelisk or something like that. It's pretty big, and it's an inscription made by the king of Moab, Mesha, King Mesha, and he's actually mentioned in the Bible. This is just another page. You can see here's the actual stone that was discovered, and then here's a handwritten description here. And then, you can see up here, they've given you, it's in 2 Kings 3. Mesha, king of Moab, was a sheep breeder. He had to deliver annually to the king of Israel 100,000 lambs. Sheesh. Now, why is he doing that? What's that 100,000 lambs? It's tribute. It's tribute. So Mesha was subject to the kings of Israel. But when Ahab died, the king of Moab rebelled against the king of Israel. And what the Mesha stone tells the story of is how Mesha rebelled against the king of Israel, and it's all of his great battle exploits. And the god of Moab, the patron god of Moab, was a god named Chemosh. And so he talks about how Chemosh empowered him to conquer all these Israelites and so on, these despicable Israelites. And anyway, it's quite fascinating to read. But this is the kind of thing we're talking about. So big stone, teeny tiny little writing, and you guys, I had to read and translate this for a class that I had at University of Madison, Wisconsin. Just your worst nightmare. Your worst nightmare. And I will never have to do it again for the rest of my life. But I learned a lot in the experience, but it was horrifying. Anyway, so it's possible. You can actually fit quite a lot of text on a rock. That's my basic point right here. You can fit a lot of text on a rock. And so the idea of writing out all the words of this Torah on multiple large stones, you could actually do it. And then you put it on wagons and take it to the top of this mountain. And then this is the other thing. We've talked about these mountains before. Mount Ebal and Gerizim. It's right at the center of Israel-Palestine. And In the center, right between the two mountains, right? They're like Mount Tabor, they're hills, is the modern Palestinian town of Nablus. And so you have the two mountains. Do you remember I showed you this picture once before? But actually, here we go. This is the best, is this kind of silly Bible Maps website, but it really gets you. So here's again the town right here, and then Gerizim is over here, Ebal's over here, and it is a natural amphitheater. It's actually a large, not a convex, a concave bowl between the two mountains. And so a bunch of Israelites come up here, a bunch of Israelites come up over there. The book of Joshua tells us about them doing this. They got the stones and the altar, and they built the altar over here. Now, let's keep reading. Verse 9. Then Moses and the priests, who are Levites, said to all Israel, "Be quiet. Everybody be quiet. Israel, listen. You have now become the people of Yahweh your God. Obey Yahweh your God. Follow his commands and decrees that I give you today." On the same day, Moses commanded the people, "When you've crossed the Jordan, these tribes will go stand on Mount Gerizim to pronounce blessings on the people: Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Joseph, Benjamin. And then these tribes will go stand on the other side of the amphitheater to pronounce curses: Reuben, Gad, Asher, Zebulun, Dan, Naphtali. And then the Levites will recite to all of the people in a loud voice. And then what follows is a list of the Israelites shouting over the amphitheater here, curses. And it's going to cite a number of laws from the Torah that are all drawn from the body of laws right here. And the whole point is that, remember, if you obey, it'll be blessing and it'll be great. If you don't obey, you're going to call down the consequences of obedience on yourself, namely curse and calamity and misfortune and so on. And so here, let's just do it. We'll like recreate the experience here. Kind of, not really. And think about which of the 10 commandments these link to. These are all linked to expressions of the 10 commandments. Cursed is the man who carves an image or casts an idol, a thing detestable to Yahweh, the work of the craftsman's hands, and sets it up in secret. So remember, the first of the 10 commands is no images to represent Yahweh. He's the creator, not a created thing. It's dishonoring Yahweh. And then all the people shall say, Amen. This is the first time the word amen occurs in the Bible. You're looking at it right here. It's the first amen. We've probably done this before. Amen is literally the word trustworthy or true in Hebrew. So we have this in English. Well, I don't know. Maybe you don't say it. Do you guys say true that anymore? That's it. That's amen. That's amen. True that. All the people say, yep, we all agree. In other words, Israel is all, we're saying out loud here as a community, we're a community of this covenant. These are our core values. These are the kinds of choices and behaviors we think that dehumanize people, that don't make us into the kind of humans Yahweh is calling us to become here. And so we're publicly saying these kinds of behavior are going to lead to calamity and curse. Verse 16, cursed is the man who dishonors his father and mother. And all the people shall say, cursed is the man who moves his neighbor's boundary stone. So remember, ancestral land, the whole point is ancestral land. If everybody has their plot of land and they obey Torah, then there'll be a blessing, and then the poor are provided for. But then you start messing and stealing people's land, and the whole thing just falls apart. So don't move boundary stones. And all the people say, cursed is the man who leads the blind astray on the road, taking advantage of the vulnerable. All the people shall say, cursed is the man who withholds justice from the immigrant and the fatherless and the widow. All the people say, Cursed is the man who sleeps with his father's wife or stepmother, for he dishonors his father's bed, all the people say. Cursed is the man who has sex with an animal, all the people say. Cursed is the man who sleeps with his sister, the daughter of his father or of his mother, all the people say. Cursed is the man who sleeps with his mother-in-law, all the people say. So you have 4 curses that are outlining, they're exploring in different ways, in negative ways, the positive view of human sexuality enshrined in the Torah, which is that covenant of marriage is awesome. It leads to all kinds of awesome blessings, and sex is one part of that. And the moment you take that outside of the covenant, then it just wreaks havoc in people's lives. So that's a whole part of sexual integrity is a part of this whole deal. Verse 24. Cursed is the man who kills his neighbor secretly, all the people say. Cursed is the man who accepts a bribe to kill an innocent person, all the people say. Cursed is the man who doesn't uphold the words of this Torah by carrying them out, all the people say. How many curses was that? There's 12. 12. How many tribes are up on the hill shouting all these curses? It's 12. Yeah, there you go. And there you go, Deuteronomy 27. And we've just crossed into the covenant sermons. So, man, there's a million different things for us to take away here. The rest of the covenant sermons are going to be Moses again. I call it the locker room speech before the game, before they go onto the field of the promised land. He's going to be like, dude, it's in your best interest and the interest of the poor if you obey. Why would you choose blessing? Choose blessing. You've both gone up in these mountains and shouted the kinds of ways that this is all going to go horribly wrong through these curses. Don't do it, don't do it. Did you notice how many of these things talk about doing something in secret? Or that would be, isn't that interesting? So you say in public, you talk in public about things that you might do in secret. And it's a way of jolting yourself into awareness. It's very powerful. So there, you get the idea. You're kind of getting the effect. So I think here's our takeaways, is this very powerful statement that all of my life is gift and grace, and that we retell the story of salvation to remind ourselves that our existence is a gift. And if you are operating and living from that mindset, it will bring about generosity. And so you have this whole thing about provision for the vulnerable, because you don't view your stuff as only belonging to you. It belongs to help give others and help them get on their feet. And then you have this kind of corporate reminder that it's in all of our best interests to live in this way as people of the covenant. And to not do so is only going to bring calamity and curse upon us. There you go, Deuteronomy 26 and 27. Let's conclude by, of course, remembering how did this story go. Well, notice what's missing. They're supposed to shout curses and what? What's missing from Deuteronomy 27? What's that about? And here, it's going to become really clear Moses' view of how Israel is going to fare in this story here. How, in fact, is Israel going to behave as the story goes on? So they're going to disobey. They're going to call down curse on themselves. And so he really was full of passion, like this could go really good. But in this section of covenant sermons, he's just like, yeah, it's not going to go good at all. And he knows that because he lived in the wilderness with them for 40 years. And so really all of this is moving forward in the storyline to that line where Paul says, Messiah of Israel comes to take the curse of the law into himself on behalf of Israel and on behalf of all humanity, so that broken, screwed up humans like us can have grace and forgiveness in life. So let me close with prayer, and let's remember the gospel And I'll just ask the Spirit to point out what we need to take with us from all this.